That is, he wanted to, they had a Texas company crew working there on a Caltex concession in the western desert. And he wanted me to go and look at the data. And so he said, well, it's early November now. If we leave right away, we'll be back for Christmas. Actually, what happened, I came back the following May. And poor Ida left alone in the city, all that time alone. But she adapted herself by joining the Women's Club, by taking a course at UCLA, and that sort of thing. And got to Egypt, did the work there, and then it so happened that Aramco, or it was called Cassock in those early days, was drilling a well on a GSI anomaly in northern Saudi Arabia, up near the neutral zone, a place called Abu Adria. And they wanted me to look at the data because that well was already down close to 9,000 feet. And that was considered ridiculous in a foreign area to be that deep. They'd gone through all the Jurassic producing zones down in Dammam Dome and still didn't find it. The chief geologist, Max Steinecke, wanted to shut it down. And he said, this will give us a good excuse to get rid of those darn geophysicists. Because he and I classified him in those days as probably being the world's outstanding oil finder. Because he had a lot to do with finding that all that original oil in Saudi Arabia, purely on the basis of surface geology. And he wanted to shut it down, but the drilling superintendent said, please, Max, I think I smell sulfur in the returning mud. I'd like to carry on a little bit further. Well, you darn fool, go on then, but at least you'll have to shut down when you run out of casing or drill pipe, drill stem. So that was the situation when George and I left there. And incidentally, before I left there, I had to help start a marine crew offshore Bahrain Island for Cassock, or maybe that was for Bahrain Petroleum, not sure, Bahrain Petroleum, under Neil Mann as party chief. And that was back in the days when these had these S-10 seismometers that weighed only 10 pounds each. We'd lower each one to the bottom, and then we'd set off dynamite, not in the water, but in a hole drilled below the bottom. Well, it so happened one night a shamal came up. That's a strong wind out of the north. And we dragged anchor, and all the other little boats around us, the Arab dhows, were all gone in the morning, including the one with our dynamite. Well, the British admiral, the British naval advisor working with us said, well, that's going to be easy to find. All we have to do is go in the direction of the wind until we come to the first shore. And we did that, and sure enough, down in Gutter, there was we found our dhow up on the beach. And it was there, so we landed, and we walked up to the dhow, and sure enough, there was all of our cases of Hercules powder in the dhow. And by that time, some of the local Bedouins came up, and we apologized for defiling their country with our boat and its bad cargo. And they said, we know it's bad because we opened one of the boxes, and we sliced and tasted one of those sticks or something and tasted it, and we didn't like it. Of course, we didn't want to tell them it was dynamite or anything like that. So we said, well, if you don't mind, we'll come back tomorrow with a bigger ship to pull this one off and take that dynamite away. We came back the next day. This dhow was still there, but the dynamite was all gone. In other words, the local emir felt that anything worth coming back for must be valuable. So he had taken it and hidden it. And so I tracked him down, got in touch with him, and he said, all right, I'll give it to you, but you're going to have to give me $25,000. I said, oh my God, we can't do that. I haven't got that. Well, I'm sorry. Well, we got a hold then. We had to go back to Bahrain now and get a hold of the local the local British consul there, and he got in touch with the British consul over in Gutter, and he said, well, the law of the sea applies. In other words, whoever finds that is entitled to half its value. Now, how much is it worth? I said, oh, about $5,000. All right, you're going to have to pay $2,500 then to get it back. But it's a hell of a lot better, and we did. But that's the sort of things we had to contend with in those early days. But anyway, George and I took...
Your first Marine, that was about your first Marine job, wasn't it?
Yes, that was the first Marine job. And that was, to say, back in 1939 and 40, early 40. And so George and I left that time. As I say, a Bouadrie was still drilling. It was about 9,600 feet when we left and still poking along. And so we went to see, visit our crew working up the Indus River Valley in northwest India. It wasn't Pakistan in those days. And so we went and traveled to Jakarta and took an overnight train ride up to Bawalpur. George used to call it Badwallapur, Bawalpur, to a place called Tanabula Khan. And I remember riding up overnight on a train up the Indus River Valley. The local geologist that I was with, Cecil, you and I'll share this stateroom here. And you can have the upper berth. I'll take the lower. Well, I thought he was a poor sport to put me in the upper berth. But the next morning, I had to thank him gratefully because when I woke up, I had about 1/10 of an inch of dust all over me. I looked down on him, and he had about 1/2 an inch of dust on him because of the desert, going overnight in the desert. And I always remember, too, the night before, we had to have dinner. The only way to get in the dining car was wait till the train stopped at the local station, and then get out on the platform, walk along the platform, and then back into the dining car. And there was about 4 of us together, and one of us pulled out a cigar and started to light it while he was looking at the menu. And he got a tap on the shoulder, and it was from a man sitting at the next table. The man said, "Pardon me, sir, but I wish you would suppress that cheroot. It's a bit foul before dinner, you know." So, but anyway, another little thing that happened while George and I were up there, you got 2 radiograms. One was from San Francisco and the other one from Arabia. He decided to open the one from San Francisco first, feeling it was probably from his boss, Vice President for Exploration. And sure enough, it was, from Clark Jester, G.C. Jester. And it stated, "As soon as you have finished in India, and before going any further east, please go back to Arabia and conduct a post-mortem study on how and why we ever got in that terrible $1.5 million mistake at Abu Adria." And of course, George let out a moan. "Oh my God, I hate to go back." I said, "Well, George, why don't you open the other radiogram?" "Oh yeah, I'd forgotten it." So he opened it, and it was from Max Steinecke. "Abu Adria has just come in at 10,200 feet for 1,500 barrels a day." So I said, "George, what do we do now?" "Oh, let's go and have a beer." So that was just another little adventure. One minute you're in the doghouse, the next minute you're on top of the world. So that sold Max Steinecke on there was something after all to reflection seismology. And so from then, George and I went on down to the Far East, down to Sumatra, visited 2 crews there to Sumatra, one under Sam Stoneham and the other one under Al Storm, working for Caltex down there. And so, as I say, finally made it back to Dallas in May. And Ida hadn't divorced me. She was still the same devoted wife. She understood. And my folks had helped her by coming up from staying with her, too, from time to time. They were living in San Diego at that time. And then, so I continued then. That was in 1940. Well, the following year, 1941, I got a call from Karcher and McDermott to please, and also from Eric Johnson, please come in to Dallas to discuss a very important proposition. So I did. And the proposition was that GSI, is a subsidiary of a small oil company that's been started inadvertently by Karcher, Coronado Oil Company. And, or was it Conrado? Conrado, huh?
Colorado Oil.
I think it was Conrado Oil Company, yes. And he had our clients, oil company clients, got worried about this. And this resulted from Karcher having used spare GSI crews in between contracts to do a little search work for him, for some personal project. And of course it ended up by finding oil. So we were in the oil business, and as I say, we had to get out of that. So Karcher decided to sell the company to not to Atlantic Richfield, but to Stanley. And they bought it, agreed on the price, but they didn't particularly care about the geophysical part. They had their own geophysical department. So the proposition that was presented to me was, let's four of us buy the oil company.
The geophysical.
Buy the geophysical part of it. So, and have a partnership. And the four of us were McDermott, Eric Johnson, Bate Peacock, and me. And I think the price was something like $275,000 total. And I had to raise 1/4 of that. So I had to mortgage everything, even my life insurance policies. But with the help of the Republic Bank in Dallas, I was able to obtain a loan and was able to buy my share. And so that was the beginning of GSI. And then, of a partnership. And then after we'd signed that, just 2 or 3 days afterwards, Pearl Harbor took place. Immediately we were at war, and then quickly thereafter, Selective Service went into action by announcing, looking for new oil is not important to the military effort. You better get your technical people into something more important, or we're going to take them. So that caused us to scrounge around then. And Eric Johnson in particular took on the job of going back to Washington to see if he couldn't find something that we could do or make in order to hold our technical people. Well, it so happened that he discovered that a man named Victor Vacquier, V-A-C-Q-U-I-E-R, while working with Gulf before the war, Gulf Oil and Research Company in Pittsburgh, this man had invented MAD, magnetic aerial detector, for doing reconnaissance work over virgin country. And this was very important to Gulf because they just obtained a concession in Mozambique. And they wanted to do reconnaissance work first before moving in with any seismic work. And it was so sensitive to minute changes in the strength of the Earth's magnetic field that it had to be towed at the end of a 200-foot long electrical cable behind a slow-flying aeroplane. And it didn't take at that time, too, the great threat that we had as a country was German submarines lying offshore our Atlantic harbors waiting to sink our ships. Well, it didn't take the Bureau of Aeronautics of the U.S. Navy very long to find out about this, because they were so concerned about this German submarine menace that they felt anything that sensitive might be able to detect the presence of a submerged iron body, such as a German submarine. So they got a concession from Gulf to take these on and to use them for military purposes. and we were among the first to line up and get a contract to make them. So that was the very, very beginning of making making instruments. But at the same time, while that happened, the Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes, had decided to organize PAW, Petroleum Administration for War. And he had the good sense to feel this might be a longer war than we hoped for. And we might need more oil, so we better continue to look for it. But that doesn't mean that that our people would be excused. No, we had to fight to keep them. And my job then became fighting and struggling with draft boards. And I must have done that with at least 100 draft boards during the wartime years. And I remember one famous case, and this involved a man named John Babb, whom I had hired previously in Arkansas. He was a technician on a crew in Columbia. And his draft board in El Dorado, Arkansas, a man or a clerk named A.A. Maxwell, he decided that they were going to take him. How can that man be important to you working down in Columbia? Besides, he's never seen the inside of a college as a student. But I said, well, that doesn't make a difference. He's valuable. But even so, he wouldn't believe me. So I got so exasperated, I ended up in Little Rock and talked to the director of Selective Service for the state of Arkansas, a man named General Compere. He had been in the Home Guard. And he said, well, I know a little bit. I started by saying I want to see us win this war as any other loyal citizen would. But at the same time, I feel we've got to keep this man. He said, let me tell you something. I know a little bit about the oil business, and I know it can be important. And he said, but I'm going to tell you this. We're going to struggle and fight to get that man. But on the other hand, if deep down in your heart you feel that man is absolutely indispensable, then it's your responsibility to fight even harder than we do to keep him. I said, thanks, that's all I want to know. And of course, we kept him. Yeah. So we continued doing the rest of the war then, with our geophysics and also making these magnetic aerial detectors. And we also had a contract with the Signal Corps, too.
Making what? Radar?
Well, rangefinders, yeah, rangefinders. Anyway, at the end of the war, the Iron Curtain came down. In other words, Russia changed from being an ally to a potential enemy. So the military effort continued, and our contract continued. But at the same time, we felt pretty unsure, pretty nervous about it. The Russians might change their minds overnight, wind the curtain up again, remove the war threat, and military contracts would be canceled. So that's what caused them to look around to see if there wasn't something of a civilian nature we could get into. And at that time, it was announced generally that 3 men working for AT&T, and working for Bell Laboratories rather, had invented, received the Nobel Prize for inventing transistors, which are made of germanium. And we felt, well, my God, now this is something now. Because what we were looking for was something around the corner, just over the hill, that we could get into, brand new. We knew we couldn't catch up with the electronics company making vacuum tubes and all that stuff. We couldn't possibly. It had to be something brand new. And the transistor was it. And especially since the electrical companies looked down their noses at it. They were making too much money with their vacuum tubes to fool around with transistors. But we felt there was a real usefulness for transistors. was in miniature devices, such as pocket radio receivers. And so the first one came out, designed by us and made by a company up in Indianapolis for us. And that was for Christmas in 1954. Or was it 56? Maybe in 56.
I think it's 56.
Yeah, 56.
But we never.
Yeah, but we hoped then that other companies then would move in and want to get in. But they didn't. But what happened was the Japanese took over. But another thing too was that we very quickly discerned that germanium had a very serious limitation, a temperature limitation. You take a germanium transistor out to Bakersfield, say, where the temperature can get up to 135 degrees on the sidewalks there, and you don't have a transistor anymore. Whereas everybody knew that silicon, if we could only make a transistor out of silicon, the cutoff temperature would be 250 degrees centigrade. So, boy, when we went into the making of transistors, we obtained one of the assistant scientists to these three Nobel Prize winners from Bell Laboratories, and I've forgotten his name now. I can't think of it right now.
Wasn't that the beginning of our digital?
Yeah.
Our digital system?
No, that was not quite the beginning, no.
Not quite the beginning, okay.
No. But anyway, we were the first then to make the things out of silicon. And then later on, we were the first one to make multiple transistors on a single piece of silicon. In other words, we were the first ones to bring out the chip. And that was by a man named Jack Kilby. Yeah.
Now, we were still GSI at that time.
Yes.
We were still GSI.
Still GSI. Well, about that time, our lawyers told us, hey, you probably don't know it, but you're in violation of your charter to do business in the state of Texas. And that is, you're doing two totally dissimilar things. You're doing service for the oil industry, and at the same time you're manufacturing electronic devices for sale. You're going to have two companies. So that was the beginning as we adopted a new name, and that was Texas Instruments.
But didn't you call it General Instruments?
General Instruments first, but we so quickly found out there was already a General Instruments back east.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Well, that was the start of the digital area.
Yeah.
Now, didn't we have the first digital instruments?
Yeah. And then I became president of the company about that time. And the thing that interested me most, as being the most important thing, was to obtain new capable young scientists. And I decided then to organize an orientation program, starting out with MIT and the Colorado School of Mines first. And that was to bring selected young people who had just finished their sophomore year and were about to become juniors, and going to major in geophysics. And our idea is to bring a selected group of these students to Dallas and provide them orientation so that they could really test their inclination to see if applied geophysics, exploration geophysics, was really going to be their cup of tea. And in other words, what we were looking for, we put on the lectures in Dallas of how reflection seismology works and how useful it is. We described the instrumentation, the various techniques in the field, and of course show them typical records and so on. And I think at the end of the first year, one of the students said, "Mr. Green, this all sounds very interesting, but how important is it to to the petroleum industry. I could have said, well, it's extremely important. But instead of doing that, I decided to get representatives from the client oil companies to answer that question. But since, after all, they were paying the bill for the work, and they're the logical ones to say how important it is. So representatives from every major oil company came one after another during the next few years to talk to these students. And out of these students, we really got some gems. Students who came with us as juniors, and some of them eventually came to us later on with their PhD degrees. In other words, 5, 6 years later. And some of those then, 2 of those that I could name, Mark Smith and Milo Backus, in particular, were the ones that developed the application of digital technology to seismic exploration, for which SEG gave us an award just recently. A science award, you know. Yeah. Do you think I've talked long enough now?
Won't you cut off just a minute, Captain, and let him...
Ready?
Yeah.
And I would summarize my feelings as I look back over my career, that if I had to live my life over again, I'm in the very fortunate position of being able to say that I would do exactly the same thing again. One of the things that has appealed to me is the quality of people in exploration, in the petroleum exploration industry. I think if you ever meet a geologist, a petroleum geologist or a petroleum geophysicist who is an egotist, you know you are listening to a beginner. And so this makes the quality of people of the highest. Another thing we've all discovered in our company, and that is the pleasure of accomplishment. That's one of the happiest feelings that one can obtain. And that happy feeling comes from overcoming some difficult job, at the same time working in the country and benefiting that country by having the people thank you for the improvement in standard of living you are about to bring to them. So to say, it's a wonderful feeling. And I would say that my company then is made up of people who are dedicated to their work. And as I've often thought, in fact, it's been my direct experience, that when we send people abroad, we don't have to worry about whether they're working hard enough. We have to worry more about whether they're working too hard to the detriment of their health. And so, as I say, it's been a wonderful organization of people. And as we all know, new ideas come from people who love their work, and that's what our people do.